All right, ladies and gentlemen, apparently the infamous document that I use for pretty much 90% of my videos, shout out to Jess Corden and those in the media who were willing to actually put this out there, is now under question. Apparently, it's come to my knowledge that this document in context was actually created when Xbox actually had offered PlayStation the 3-year deal for Call of Duty. Now, here's the challenge and how I fail to see this is I don't see anywhere where it references a 3-year deal. However, someone has claimed that it's because it says the Call of Duty threat in 2027. Which is interesting, which basically means that according to them who are questioning this document, they are saying that this document was written at a time when PlayStation thought that they weren't going to get 10 years of Call of Duty. Now, which means that somewhere, somehow, PlayStation is probably going to be trying its best within the next 10 years to get something that can match or keep it, independent of Call of Duty at the end of the day. Or that this document is fully now in question because now that they have the 10-year deal, the so-called dominance that PlayStation was talking about in here that, Xbox has dominated them from no longer applies. Let's go ahead and look at that claim because this is it's a big, huge move of the goalposts, but I will play. Because one thing I love to do is, my fellow PlayStation fans, at every single, point of this conversation, I want for you to push against the things that I say. Like, give me a refutation in your arguments. Let me see if there might be an area that I'm missing something. I don't want to walk around here thinking like I'm the smartest guy in the room. I mean, honestly, it's kind of cringe to do that. You got to be open to criticism. You got to be open to what people may be pointing out to you because there's a possibility that you might be wrong, and that's just the reality. So I want to go ahead and examine what in the world is going on here. So there was an audience member. I don't know if they're new, but I've never seen this account before. So shout out to you. The Dark Demon King said, "You keep showing that leaked document, but fail to properly understand it. The top version of the document refers to the initial 3-year deal that Sony was offered by Microsoft. The middle is a potential of what could come of the acquisition." Okay, so what you're saying is that the middle of the document is what could come of the acquisition regardless of the 10-year deal. Regardless of the 3 or 10-year deal. The bottom, which is the most important part, is a final analysis of what Sony thinks is the best way forward. I see people referencing the document as a gotcha, like Sony knows they're cooked, not understanding that Sony still feels this strategy is unsustainable. Okay, well, let's examine for these 3 criteria that you said. You said the top version refers to the 3-year deal. So let's look at the top version here. The top version basically says Microsoft's acquisition of Activision positions it to leapfrog our current pillars. So number 1, Activision provides incredible strategic value across live service games, scale in mobile, and PC storefront. There is nothing that any timeline can do to change this reality. This is a reality. Activision has some heavy-hitting games. I mean, we're talking Call of Duty, but no one is actually talking about, WoW and some of the other games that are hiding under Blizzard and Activision that are big money makers. So I don't think, you're looking at it from that perspective. But again, this is just what the document is showing. But I want to kind of entertain you. You said, in addition, Microsoft is building a mobile game store to compete with Apple and Google. This has nothing to do with the timeline. So already what they're thinking is regardless of any timeline, Activision being an asset in Microsoft or Xbox's hands makes it very dangerous. And also the possibility of them putting it on a mobile store already decimates their ecosystem. Even with these 2 pointers, Activision is positioned in Microsoft's hand to leapfrog all of Sony's current pillars. So let's look at the top of the document. You said a Call of Duty threat in 2027. Now, for the most part, I haven't necessarily cited this part of the document. I usually stick with the leapfrog. The pillars are outdated and behind the competition. The multi-game subscription, which is a description of Microsoft's business. I've also talked about the elusive game model from time to time. But let's go ahead and see what they're saying here. Microsoft's acquisition of Activision could disrupt and threaten the console gaming and game subscription markets. This is independent of a timeline because as of today, we're seeing it where it has actually done it just 48 hours ago, or depending on where you are. So the disruption that they're pointing out here has already happened, regardless of any timeline. It didn't need to wait till 2027. Didn't need to wait till whatever. Even in 2023, that disruption was already building up. But in this particular 2024 launch, that disruption has already happened. Okay? Then they said a console shift from PlayStation to Xbox with timing and in-game differential as the weapons. It appears to me that they are aware in a sense that people may be shifting because of the in-game differential in terms of both games. For the most part, this is my understanding, I might be wrong. For the most part, PlayStation has had a higher quality version or a much more robust version of the Call of Duty game than Xbox has. So I think this is probably what PlayStation was afraid of, that people would jump ship if the version of Call of Duty on Xbox was the better version that had more exclusives that they did not want to miss out on PlayStation. So PlayStation is afraid of the market and the conditions that they created in the past. This document does not in any way, like if you dig deeper into this document, every time you overlook at it or you look at it under a microscope, it continues to get worse. Like I've been trying to kind of, just do the surface type of thing to kind of get, that in first. But everything you dig in, it just makes everything weird. Subscription. Microsoft's comprehensive ecosystem coupled with exclusivity creates greater dominance. So this is probably where people are saying that the 3 years, when they thought it was 3 years. But guys, look at this. When they thought it was 3 years, they thought it was going to create a greater dominance, which means regardless, it was already dominant. When you say greater, it means that there is something already there. When you say something is a threat, and then you say coupled with something else, it's a greater threat, then it already means that that threat is already established even at the base level without any other extenuating factors. So to my audience member that said this and said, that's explaining the top, the middle, and the bottom, we all can read, we all can deduce, we all can make inference. So you're saying it refers to the initial 3-year deal that Sony was offered. But what is, inherently different from the 3-year deal versus a 10-year deal, other than if the 3-year deal expired, the exclusivity, if it kicked in after 3 years, made for the dominance to be much greater, which the dominance is already here. So the difference now is as to PlayStation was basically saying we're actually cooked as they have the Activision game, but we are literally toast. So burnt toast if they were to go exclusive with it. That's pretty much the difference I'm seeing here. If I'm seeing it wrong, somebody correct me in the comment section. If you're seeing it differently, let me know in the comment section. I'm absolutely open to this conversation. Then they said Sony Impact. Massive threat. Now, I could deduce that this Sony Impact area, which I barely even cite because it's written it just crumbles up everything. It seems like it's an internal document so people would understand what these metrics mean. I've interpreted it in my own way, but I still go back and go, do I even know what the heck they're talking about here? So maybe let's say this third point, as a result of maybe the possible or the thought that there will be a 3-year deal, it was a massive threat to PlayStation Plus, upwards of $1.5 billion of annual revenue threat, which was going to create a gap to fill. I don't know how they came up with 45 million subscribers. Are these the number of PlayStation subscribers? Or are these the number of Xbox Game Pass subscribers that they were predicting if Call of Duty was to get on Game Pass? That's where I'm not really too certain about this number. Times $12 a month. The $12 a month at the time, I can't even still remember what Game Pass prices had been. It'd been $1, then it was like $4.99, and it just did all kinds of promotions over the years. Times 12 months, times 20% multiplayer third party. Okay, this might be PlayStation Plus. They're probably looking at their numbers and saying that they don't seem to have enough to be able to compete with the subscription. Then this is the next part, which you see the bottom part in your whatever, which is the most important part, is the final analysis of what Sony thinks is the best way forward. Well, hold on. You missed out on this part, which says the day and date threat. Post-acquisition, Microsoft, and this didn't even have anything to do with the 3-year deal. It just said once they are acquired, they're going to put Activision games on Game Pass day and date. That was the threat. It's a day and date threat independent of any kind of deal. So even within the 3 years or 10 years, they're still boiling in the dominance. You see, this is the most damning thing about, that's why the media looked at this, because and I've said this before, guys, there are many, many more documents that came out, But this particular, snippet was the most critical one, was the most newsworthy one, because it just basically summarizes everything in the most, tangible way that you can get it. And then Leapfrog, then it says Activision provides incredible strategic value across live service games, scaling mobile, PC storefront, Battle.net, reiterating the point that it iterated here before the 2027 date that my audience members that are kind of questioning the context of this document. So it quotes what was written outside of the timeline and then puts it back in here and then talks about underneath it simply because Microsoft, and then it expands on Microsoft's business composition. This is where a lot of PlayStation fans continue to run into a wall head on, because in their minds, they've gone after the console sales, realize that the console sales is not Microsoft's business that it hinged on. Then now they're going after Game Pass. You should see the downplaying for Game Pass. It's come up again, but also not realizing that Game Pass is also just a piece of the pie. So Game Pass and console make up 50% each, and then PC 60%, according to PlayStation's analysis. It could be different inside of Microsoft's own internal numbers as to what the numbers and the split looks like, but it's still them just pretty much throwing out their spitball numbers based on probably what it is that they see. Because I'm sure they can probably get total sales of, these games and deduce and say, okay, we sold this many of Call of Duty. So it probably means that these other numbers were sold by this, because Steam's numbers are also, in a sense, somewhat, accessible using Steam database and others. So they can pull data. And so them coming up with this data of 50, 60 is not too far off if I were to think about their capabilities as a corporation that is literally one of the only console manufacturers to pull that data set. And then they concluded. So whether within the context of 3 years or the context of 10 years, they conclude that Sony's pillars are already dated and behind the competition. If they cannot catch up in 3 years, and they still have to take, and their relief is 10 years, they're still behind the competition. There's no way you want to ride it. So now, in fact, if anything, benevolent Xbox has now given them another 7 years to breathe and try to come up with their multiplayer hit that's going to kind of help them. That's what you're saying at this point. And then the final part, which says the elusive perfect game subscription. Premium content, expectation of free best-in-class games creates unsustainable model. So that is their own analysis. They think Game Pass is unsustainable with this kind of a big content dump on there. However, what they fail to realize, and I've challenged this, is that when Bobby Kotick walked up to Xbox and said to them, if we don't get a bigger share, we'll take Call of Duty off. It only just shows, ladies and gentlemen, that PlayStation and PC can actually sustain Call of Duty without Xbox. So how did PlayStation come up with this particular unsustainable model? An expectation of free. Perhaps they are, talking about how this is a model that they can't fathom seeing how they can create it. They said monthly and incremental subs won't cover investment. You're right, but you will cover the investment. So even if in 3 years, Microsoft cannot raise enough people to cover the investment, Microsoft will just simply pivot and say, well, hold it again for another 3 years until we figure this out. Then they say unified mobile PC console experience doesn't exist from a factor of factor and computer power are too diverse. Sony Impact premium sales model is a central approach. And the final part we interpret as them basically giving you a $700 console without the disc drive, and then a $900 anniversary edition without the disc drive. Well, I guess it comes with everything, doesn't it? I don't know if it comes. Yeah, the $1,000 console basically, premium model. We also interpret it as them increasing the price of PlayStation Plus and possibly pushing for games to be starting out at, a higher price. So when it comes down to it, I still think that this document is damning. It doesn't even soften the blow. It actually makes it actually much worse than you would actually imagine, ladies and gentlemen. But it's interesting. I really appreciate, people pointing that out. Again, I don't think they've actually taken time to consider ramifications of whatever may be going on, because whether or not it's for a 3 or a 10-year deal, right now, PlayStation is still on the back foot because they cannot make up that differential without having a live service game of their own. They would need for maybe Epic Games to basically, or other, third party, AAA multiplayer games to all do better than Call of Duty, and then somehow be able to farm all that money. But again, those platforms, they've basically hedged themselves where they have their own, pipelines. And even those platforms exist on Xbox too. So Xbox is also making money as well. And they're not just only making money in the case of those other third-party multiplayer. They're making money in the sense that if those people come into cahoots with them, like Apex Legends and all of the other games on EA Play, they can access those games from the cloud. So again, they're checkmated, because though they may have the console sales, Xbox has the platform to deliver just as much in terms of video games and content as they can. That's basically what they said in the middle part. It doesn't absolve them of anything. I mean, except maybe I'm going crazy. Maybe my mind is warping. So thanks for the comment. Shout out to you, sir. And I appreciate the time and effort that you put in. But let me hear your thoughts in the comment section, guys. Appreciate you all so much. Hopefully we'll talk pretty soon in another one. Peace out.